Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graben. We're joined today by Kyle Kumpf. He's joining us from Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa. He has founded previously a few businesses. He's been a consultant. He's currently working in the corporate world and the financial services industry. So, Kyle, thank you for being a guest today. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure thing. I know you have a lot of experiences to draw on. I'm curious what the answer is going to be. Kyle, what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, happy to share. So my favorite mistake is something that happened very early on in one of my roles I've had in my career, where I disobeyed one of my own personal values.
Hmm.
And so the scenario is to kind of set up. There was a reconciliation process that happened every day. And this one day, the operator was running it, and something odd came up. So they stopped and called for help to another department to help them resolve this issue. And through that work, they thought they had resolved it, so they continued to move on and complete the process and thought we were all good. And then the next day, all hell broke loose. Something hadn't gone the way it should. And our customer's customer was the one that was being quite negatively impacted from this issue, this error that happened. And I found out the second day because I was copied in on an email chain to the message that says who's accountable for this. And judging by who it was from, I'm like, oh, I better read the rest of this chain to see who's on this, who knows who's been told what at this point, and then go dig in and figure out what's really going on here. And so I found out who had been running the process that day. So I could go talk to them. And so we sat down and talked, and they explained, here's the standard process, here's what I did, and here's what was different about that day and what I did and who I called in to fix it. Mm-hmm. And after going through all that, I concluded that procedure was followed. Obviously, there is a gap because this error got through, so we need to fix that. But there was nothing negligent on the operators and their process that they followed that day. And so then after a little more investigation, we actually found the root cause, found out that there was a bug that existed in the system that happened to rear its head that day. Could have happened to anyone. So I thought, great, we found the root cause. We can fix that. We have a workaround in place right now until we get the fix in. We won't have any issues going forward. Right. And that wasn't enough for the affected party. They wanted someone to blame. Blaming the process just wasn't going to cut it. So long story short, instead of standing up and saying, no, here's the issue and here's what I think we can do, even though we're deeply sorry this happened, here's why it happened and what we're going to do to remedy it. Mm-hmm. I instead went and wrote up that employee that had been operating the process that day, essentially telling them, you did everything right, but yet you're still going to get written up. And now this is going to be on your record going forward, which didn't seem right. Right. I was uncomfortable doing it, not because giving someone bad news is hard, which it is. I was again going against my own value of being critical in the process and not the person. And so that day I had essentially exercised conformity instead of courage, and in that moment was a boss versus a leader.
I think that's I like the way you summarized that at the end. Choice of words there. Gosh, so I mean that story resonates with me because I'd like to think I share those values with you, Kyle, of being different way of saying it, hard on the process, not on the person. Mm-hmm. Was this a situation where I mean I don't mean the second guess. It's not the point of the podcast here, but would it have been possible to tell the customer, or I think you said the customer of the customer, that we wrote them up and not really have done it? Or I mean that's a different value perhaps of lying to somebody that would be valuable.
Yeah, that would be
Can you elaborate on some of those dynamics a little bit of I understand that somebody often gets upset, they want someone's head on a platter, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so and actually short of doing that, I had actually offered my name up, like, what, if they want someone to blame, someone to be mad at, this process falls under my responsibility, fine, I'll take it. But in that instance, my manager went to bat for me and said, "No, you're not." He protected me, and he's not going to let you do that. And then I essentially just gave in to the pressure, and all right, fine, I'll go write this employee up.
Mm-hmm. It's tough. I mean, I don't know if it's fair to go so far as to say that this is human nature to want to blame others. I mean, I think this happens a lot. I try to fight that, for example, where if I'm in a situation where I'm complaining about bad service to an organization, I'm often really hesitant to do so because I'm afraid an individual is going to be unfairly blamed for a systemic problem. But that doesn't sound like what the customer was demanding here. I'm curious if you have other reflections on this idea of, how common is it, or why people tend to want a name. I mean, we see this a lot in society.
Yeah, I'd agree with what you said earlier. This is human nature. Processes in our world today are all digital. They're not tangible. They aren't there you can't feel and touch them. So to say this process delivered this error, people they can't grasp onto that. But if you give them a name, they can picture a person that they can reach out and touch. And I think that just gives them some kind of closure as to, this person's the one that created this error. They got reprimanded. Now we're good.
Yeah. What was the reaction of the operator in this case here of being written up? Did sometimes people are hard on themselves, or did they agree that, hey, this wasn't my fault, this isn't fair to be written up?
They didn't. They took the news pretty well. I was forthcoming with them and said, I didn't just say this was coming from me. I just said I don't think this is right that I'm having to do this. But given the circumstances, here's what's happening, and they generally felt bad for what happened. They were part of the solution in finding out what actually the problem was, and so we could fix it going forward. So, and then later on, I did end up, well after the fact, I did go back to them, and because it was still in my mind, like this shouldn't have happened that way, because there are instances after that where the same pressure was there, and I did use this as a lesson. I stood up and said, no, I'm not doing this. And I did go back to that original operator, and apologize and just say, I'm sorry, that shouldn't have happened that way.
Mm-hmm. But it didn't lead to their firing. It probably didn't have huge ramifications then.
Nope. There wasn't really any negative impact to them, other than now they have this write-up on their file. Yeah, they are still employed, still eligible for promotions and other positions and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think the phrase you used, the words you used, were compliance instead of courage. Is that?
Oh, conformity instead of courage.
Conformity instead of courage. Yeah. Has reflecting on that situation helped you, be more brave in other situations that you've come in where you felt like maybe there was conflict between conformance and courage, or standing up for the right thing? And I know this is difficult in organizations.
Yeah, no, it's definitely given me, because I again, like I said, giving the person the news that, hey, you're getting written up formally, did not feel good to do that, and we don't like to feel bad ourselves, and so I use that a little bit as incentive not to do that again, and just again use facts and try to articulate in any way I can to management or customers. Here's why this issue happened, and obviously anything that is a manual process is going to have opportunity for an error to happen. We have to accept that, and then when they do happen, update them, fix them, improve them, but don't reprimand our employees or our operators, because then they're not going to become part of the solution. They're just going to be on the edge all the time, probably make more mistakes, and then we're going to have more issues. So again, just any way I can frame that and use that in discussions, not even when errors happen, but being proactive, and just anytime I have an opportunity to communicate that perspective to people, just continually get that message out there, so that when the opportunity does come up, I can fall back on, hey guys, remember when we talked about this? Yeah, let's not reprimand this person here. Let's look at the process and fix that.
Mm-hmm. And what are the origins, professionally in your studies, or influences that you have, that sort of taught you the idea of focusing on the process, not the people, or being being tough on the process instead of blaming individuals?
That would have started early on. I remember my first role out of college. I was assigned to work with a process engineer who had a pretty strong lean background. That's where I was actually introduced to lean. And he's the one that really taught me to look at everything as a process, and that processes produce the results. People just run them; they follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And that really stuck with me early on in my career. That's where I developed that personal core value of hard or critical in the process, not the person.
Yeah, and for listeners who aren't as familiar as Kyle and I are, lean refers to, it's often called lean production or lean manufacturing. I've done work in what's often described as lean healthcare, and it has roots in the Toyota production system. So Karen Ross, Matthew May, a few of my guests come from some of my circles where we do this type of work. And I just, as I've worked in different industries, I've seen in healthcare, there's such a tendency organizationally to blame nurses or blame low-level individuals for what are arguably systemic problems. It's enough of a unfortunate cultural norm. And when I first got into healthcare, there was this expression, a culture of naming, blaming, and shaming.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't lead to improvement. I'm sure you coming, if you were to take a position in healthcare, that would seem second nature to you, that it's dysfunctional to react mm-hmm. with naming, blaming, and shaming when a problem occurs. We're mm-hmm. still, I think, very much fighting that battle. We're trying to sway and influence people around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of our other friends, in this space, related to quote unquote lean or Toyota, is a friend of ours. And, so I wanted to ask, what prompted you, what got you thinking back to think about this mistake even before you and I talked about doing the podcast, I think, or you stepped up and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about something that happened." What was your inspiration for that?
Yeah, that was actually a story from Katie Anderson's new book, Learning to Lead and Leading to Learn. Not to give too much away, but there's a story in there about Mr. Yoshino and one of his first assignments in a paint shop where he made a mistake.
And this was at Toyota, by the way.
At Toyota, yes, at Toyota. And the first thing his manager said to him was, "Thank you for pointing out to us that we didn't set you up for success. It makes absolute sense. You're new. The way we had this set up, this mistake was absolutely possible." And so there's obviously a lot more detail to that story, but that's what prompted me to think, oh, I was that manager, only I didn't say thank you. I essentially slapped the person across the face and told them that they're terrible at their job by what I did. And so that's what triggered me to think about this. So definitely that's the story. I would highly recommend to any of the listeners out there to get a copy of it and not just read it to read it, but read it to actually understand it, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned in there.
Yeah, and I know you can find the book on Amazon. Katie Anderson's website is her initials kbjanderson.com, or you can search Amazon for Katie Anderson. Leading to Learn would be enough to bring up the book in Amazon. Yeah. I've made the mistake of saying the book title wrong before, so one of the many mistakes I make as I stumble through life. But Katie's book is great. Mr. Yoshino, as a retired Toyota leader, shares a lot of great stories and reflections of his own and mistakes that he made. And I think that's such, that story resonates with me too. I think it's such a rare and unusual reaction to say thank you when a mistake occurs. And what are your thoughts on how responding that way, saying thank you instead of naming, blaming, and shaming, from your experience, Kyle, how does that lead ultimately to better results for an organization?
You're definitely going to get the the staff involved in improvement. When they know that if a mistake or an error happens, that they're going to get the full support of their management team to help improve that process so that mistake doesn't happen again. Just the level of engagement and opportunities you're going to get from your staff are going to go up exponentially versus the latter, where if you're in that just blame game, it's going to be all up to management to put the fixes in, and since they're not the ones doing the process every day, likely those fixes aren't going to be the right ones.
Yeah, and it hampers our ability to fix things. It drives problems underground, and the one thing I've really tried to embrace as we explore with different guests on the podcast here, it's we need to learn from our mistakes, and naming, blaming, and shaming doesn't allow us to do that as an organization. And so I appreciate you and other guests coming on and being forthright in sharing those reflections and how that's helped shape you as a leader and as a business person and as an individual, right?
That's right. If we aren't making mistakes, we can't learn, but hopefully we are learning from them.
Yeah. So maybe final question, as you've had different roles, as an entrepreneur, when you're in the position of, instead of being an employee, being a business owner and a business leader, are there any, kind of examples that come to mind of how you've been able to use that value or that principle in your own work of not blaming individuals for systemic problems?
I can't think of a specific instance, but I can think of one client that I had when I was consulting. Just early on in the engagement, I did set a clear expectation up front, like here's how I operate, here's how I go about my work, and just incorporated it in, because that particular piece of work was around some type of process improvement. And so I just laid the groundwork that I am critical on the process. No one wakes up thinking, how can we screw up today?
Right.
So just go in with that mindset as we're going through to help solve this problem, go into it with that lens instead of the traditional blame game. And I think that definitely setting that groundwork and that expectation up front did help that particular engagement go better.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. So for those who are watching on YouTube, you can see there are many golf balls on the wall behind Kyle, and golf is important to you. Does golfing help you reflect on mistakes and trying to learn from them and improve when you're out on the course?
That's essentially the game of golf. It's one big PDSA cycle.
And tell the listeners who don't know, by PDSA is an acronym.
Plan, do, study, act. It's the scientific method. And I like the joke because I've actually used that analogy with many people before. The whole goal of golf is to shoot the lowest score possible, but you got to start with it's just one shot at a time, and you have in your head, here's what the shot's going to do. And I'm an amateur. I don't play 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, like pros do. So that shot I see in my head doesn't always happen. So after you hit it, you got to go where the ball is now, and then assess, and then figure out what you didn't do right, and try and play the next shot, all the way through the 18 holes. And it does create that discipline to continually assess what you're doing and how you're doing and get better. And I think it was Arnold Palmer or Jack Nicklaus said it best, golf is just a game of 6 inches, which is all right here between the ears. It's a big part of it's mental. My wife asked, why do you torture yourself when you have these bad rounds? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't feel good, but then when you have the good ones and you actually win, like it just feels awesome, like it all came together. And that's one of the things I really love about golf. And plus I can play it until I'm 80. It's not like football where you got to stop when you're 40 or younger for most of us.
Yeah. And back to your point of no one comes to work intending to make mistakes. Nobody ever intends to hit it into the bunker, right?
Exactly. Or the water, or 40 yards right into a cornfield.
That's your courses in Iowa.
Yeah. There's cornfields.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for coming here today and for sharing your story. Thanks for mentioning our friend Katie Anderson's book, and again that title, making sure I don't make a mistake because I've gotten the title backwards before. It is Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn is the title, and you can find that on Amazon. So Kyle Kumpf has been our guest today. Thanks a lot. Really good talking to you. Thanks for
Yep.
joining
Thanks
us.
for having me, Mark.